Steel stocks as well started off the day in the green on what could be potentially good news from China. Prasad Baji of Edelweiss and S.K. Rungta, former chairman of SAIL, both joining to talk about that. Gentlemen, morning to you. Mr. Rungta, how would you read the news that's coming from China specifically for Indian steel manufacturers?
Yeah, the Chinese government, they have been mulling over this withdrawal of export rebates for HR products, and they have announced this with 9% withdrawal in export rebates. With the possible appreciation of Chinese currency, I think these two factors must moderate Chinese exports, and to that extent, it should be welcome from the point of view of Indian steel producers.
Morning, Mr. Rungta. Do you think it might have any kind of supportive influence on global steel prices? Could they inch up further because of the Chinese move?
Yeah, certainly, because China is a major factor in the global steel scenario, and in the first 5 months of current calendar year, they are net exporters. In fact, their exports in the month of May were about 5 million tons. So to the extent their exports get moderated, it impacts the demand and supply scenario of the world. And as such, international prices more or less are at the bottom, considering the input prices. So I suppose it should have a positive impact on the global steel prices as well.
For India specifically, how much were Chinese imports as a factor which were pinning down local prices? And now if Chinese exports to India reduce somewhat, do you think it might support domestic prices in India?
Well, Chinese exports per se have not been large in volumes, but Chinese prices have been setting the benchmark prices for imports into India, and to that extent, if the base Chinese export prices go up, then that helps in setting the higher base prices for the Indian markets, and it will certainly be a positive impact in the Indian market.
Prasad, morning. Can you quantify the kind of improvement you would expect to see in steel prices because of this move?
Well, the export rebate is 9% across most of the steel products, and current export price out of China are around $600. So that would mean a $54 per ton kind of impact. So that doesn't mean that prices will move up by $54, but I think the pressure on pricing is eased off. So maybe I think gradually you will see some inching up of the prices, maybe around $25–30. Also, if you see in the other regions, the pressure that was starting to build up will start to ease off.
Your note indicates, Prasad, that the key beneficiaries are JSW Steel and Tata Steel. Walk us through why.
No, I think if you see, I would say these are our top picks in the steel space. Obviously, it would benefit all steel players. Our top picks in the steel space are these two companies. Basically, if you see the last couple of months, there have been increased amount of imports into China, into India. Indian demand is still fairly robust, but the pricing pressure was starting to be seen. So I would say that easing off. And if you see the leverage on prices, that is the highest for Tata Steel and JSW. So obviously they would be the best beneficiaries.
What about the natural resource companies like Sesagoa, Prasad, who export to China? Do you think this could be bad news for them?
I think eventually what China is possibly trying to do is to curb the excessive steel production, especially in the smaller companies there. So eventually we expect steel production cuts in China up to the extent of 10%. And that will start hurting the raw material prices. Today we see raw material prices at super high levels, and it looks like a very rosy scenario if you just look at the current prices. But we expect the prices to come off and steel production cuts to happen. And in general, the kind of growth rates that we saw in China in the past, that will tend to slow down. So I would say it would end up being bad news for the mining companies.
Mr. Rungta, what is the ground level situation in the steel market right now? Because we hear that buyers are still destocking and demand conditions are a bit on the weaker side. Do you expect them to persist?
Yeah, I suppose the sentiments have been weak for the last about 2 months, primarily due to high inventory overhang with large importers as well as with the producers. But I suppose we have reached almost the bottom of the cycle, because considering the input prices, current level of prices are not sustainable in long run, and both for iron ore and coal prices are higher for the July-September quarter. So I suppose the sentiment should start looking up once producers and importers are able to clear up their inventories, because consumption has been higher than the domestic production. So primarily in the domestic market, the sentiment has been weak because of large import arrivals in April, May, almost 1.8 million tons as against about 1 million tons last year. So I suppose once the inventories get cleared, the buyers' confidence about the current price levels should return, and I hope prices will start looking up as well.
In your experience, Mr. Rungta, do events such as what China announced yesterday lead to any medium-term ramifications for steel prices? I mean, would you bet on a rebound for the second half of 2010 now?
I think this Chinese, withdrawal of rebate is not that significant an event. Of course, to the extent it moderates Chinese exports, yes, it helps. But primarily it is to be seen that what happens with regard to their domestic production. And I agree with Mr. Prasad when he says that Chinese government is trying to curb the excessive production. And if that happens, it will have moderating influence on the raw material prices. And that helps the steel industries, especially those who are not backward integrated. So we should not read too much in this Chinese decision of withdrawal of rebate. In the past also they have adjusted the rebates, or they have imposed export tax also on certain semi-finished products. But overall sentiment will depend upon the level of production, global steel production, and I suppose the global steel production has peaked in May. Indications are that June production of China will be 8-9% lower than month on month, and so will it be lower maybe in other regions as well. And that should improve the sentiments, and the destocking also is more or less should come to an end, and normal buying should resume.
Thanks, gentlemen, both of you, for joining in with your thoughts today. That's the steel stocks now coming off a bit. The